F-16C taking off for an airshow in Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho back in September of 2003. Unfortunately though, even before takeoff, the pilot, US Air Force Captain Chris Elroy Strickland, had made a mistake which meant that this flight would end in a crash just 25.5 seconds after liftoff. The plan was for Thunderbird 6, the opposing solo jet in the formation, to accelerate to rotation speed, retract the landing gear, and then pitch to a 55-degree maximum performance climb whilst maintaining runway heading. Once the jet reached an altitude of 2,500 feet above the field, he would roll inverted and pull to bring the nose of the jet down to the horizon, still inverted, at a target altitude of 3,500 above the airfield. The pilot would then continue pulling to complete a split S maneuver, basically a half loop to reverse direction. At the end of this maneuver, the aircraft would end up straight and level again, going straight down the runway but in the opposite direction to the one he took off in. Now again, this was the plan, but unfortunately it's not how it worked out. The F-16 roared down runway 12 in Mountain Home, lifted off, tucked in its gear and pitched for its maximum performance climb, but then it rolled inverted far too early. Now, as the final report would later explain, the pilot miscalculated the difference between his altitude above mean sea level and his height above ground level by 1,000 feet. Others have pointed out that the field elevation of Mountain Home Air Base is around 1,000 feet higher than that of Nellis Air Force Base, where the Thunderbirds are normally based, which may have played a part in this error. In any case, when the F-16 started rolling inverted, it was 4,670 feet above mean sea level, but only 1,670 feet above the ground, instead of the target 2,500 feet. The aircraft kept climbing while its pilot pulled to get the nose down to the horizon until it reached 5,760 feet above mean sea level, which he misinterpreted as being 3,760 feet above the ground. So he actually thought he had a bit of a margin over the required 3,500 feet. In reality though, he was 1,000 feet below that at 2,760 feet. Captain Strickland then initiated the split S as planned and only realised that something was seriously wrong when the jet's nose was pointing straight down, and unfortunately at that point it was too late. The pilot rolled his jet slightly to one side to move it a bit further away from the crowd of 85,000 people that were gathered to one side of the runway to watch the show, whilst he pulled hard on the side stick to try and avoid contact with the ground. Incredibly though, the F-16 managed an attitude where its nose was just above the horizon, but that wasn't enough. The aircraft's energy meant that it was still descending at a rate of over 8,000 feet per minute whilst doing 220 knots. At just 140 feet above the ground, Strickland pulled the yellow handle between his legs just in front of his seat and ejected. But these speeds and descent parameters are way outside of the ejection envelope of the F-16 seat. And by the time the canopy was gone and the seat actually fired him out of the jet, Strickland was just 40 feet above the ground. Now, these are all just numbers, so to give you some context on this, the Martin Baker Mark IV seat that I used when I was flying the Hawker Hunter was known as a 090 seat, meaning that we could eject at 0 feet, on the ground, but required a minimum airspeed of 90 knots to ensure that the chute inflated enough to arrest our rate of descent before we hit the ground. But although it was a zero height chute, that was really only true when we were flying level. If we were descending and needed to eject, I'd have to pull the handle at a minimum height that was equal to 10% of our rate of descent in order to survive the landing. So if I was descending at 8,000 feet per minute in the Hunter and needed to eject, the latest point that I could pull that handle would be as I passed 800 feet above the ground. Now, going back to the F-16 ejection, Staff Sergeant Benny J. Davis, an Air Force photographer standing halfway up the control tower, managed to capture the moment the pilot left the aircraft. And you can clearly see here how the aircraft nose points above the horizon, but again, it's actually still descending at a rate that's almost twice as fast as I'd normally descend a 737, even on a steep descent. Now, the pilot's spine was compressed hard by the ejection, and it was then compressed even more when he hit the ground. The $30+ million jet hit the ground just 0.8 seconds after Captain Strickland pulled the handle, but incredibly, he and everyone watching was safe. And based on the circumstances, that really is miraculous. Now, there are a lot of lessons for the Thunderbirds from this event, including how to set and verify altitudes and increasing the minimum altitude margins. But the truly amazing part of this story is how close the F-16 actually came to completing that split S from a max altitude of just 2,760 feet or 841 meters above the runway. And that brings us to the F-16 itself, the star of our video today. Some aircraft are thought as technological milestones, machines that push engineering boundaries. Others become cultural icons, instantly recognizable symbols that represent an era. The F-16 is unusual because it does both. Even decades after its introduction, the F-16 remains one of the most familiar silhouettes in military aviation. It continues to fly in huge numbers all over the world, and perhaps most remarkably, is still being built. In an age defined by stealth, sensor fusion, and increasing complexity, here is a design that was born in the early 1970s that somehow remains relevant. But the F-16 story is not simply one of longevity. What makes the aircraft so enduringly fascinating is that it represents a moment when fighter aircraft design took a dramatic and deeply unconventional turn. Long before it became a global icon, the F-16 was an engineering gamble that ultimately paid off. Now, to understand why the F-16 exists at all, we have to step back into the realities of the early 1970s. This was a period shaped by the lessons of the Vietnam War, advancing Soviet aircraft design, and crucially, a growing concern within the Pentagon about the spiraling costs of modern combat aircraft. At first, the US wanted to plan its future around the F-15 Eagle, an aircraft designed to guarantee air superiority thanks to advanced radar systems and the raw performance of those two massive engines. It was big, fast, powerful, and extraordinarily capable, which also made it both complex and expensive. Even with the generous budgets of the Cold War era, it simply wasn't possible for the US Air Force to fully equip itself with F-15s. And this debate between capability and affordability triggered a broader discussion about what a fighter aircraft actually needed to be. And that gave birth to a small but highly influential group of thinkers and engineers at the Pentagon, often referred to as the somewhat disturbing name, the Fighter Mafia, whose input made the F-16s a reality. And I'll tell you what those guys got up to after this. On the 12th of August 2026, the European night sky will become visible in the middle of the day. Tens of millions of people will be able to look up and see the stars in the afternoon as the sun disappears behind the moon in the first total solar eclipse over the continent since 1999. Some are even calling it the eclipse of the century. Its path will pass over densely populated regions including Portugal, Spain, France, northern Italy, Germany, the UK and Iceland. The US and Canada will also see a significant portion of it in New England and Alaska. And if you're in one of these regions, get yourself some reliable eye protection to enable you to enjoy the event, but without burning your retinas. And this is VisiSolar's Solar Eclipse Viewing Kit, the sponsor of today's video. Their glasses are approved by the American Astronomical Society, so you know they're certified and safe to use. And the kit also includes a precision photo filter to protect your phone's camera. Without it, you'll either ruin the shot or potentially damage your camera. With the filter, you get a clear, perfect image that protects your camera sensor. And it's worth being really careful here. There are a lot of low quality knockoffs on the market that can damage both your eyesight and your camera. So it's really important to stick with properly certified high quality eclipse glasses like these. And VisiSolar is offering 10% off if you purchase it through this QR code or by using the code MENTOR. Go check it out. I've left a link in the description below. Thanks VisiSolar. Now, let's get back to the F-16. Now, what the Fighter Mafia argued was that decades of aircraft development had drifted towards excessive weight and complexity, often at the expense of the very qualities that mattered most in aerial combat. Their ideas were grounded in the newly proposed energy maneuverability theory, which emphasized how effectively an aircraft could gain, retain, and trade energy during a fight. From this perspective, agility, acceleration, and pilot visibility were not secondary considerations, they were central to survival. The solution they advocated was not a replacement for the F-15, but something that would complement it. Thus came the Lightweight Fighter Program, an initiative that challenged many of the assumptions that had guided fighter designs for years. Instead of asking how much capability could be added, the question became how much could be removed without compromising performance. At the heart of this new design philosophy was something that we explored recently in another video about aircraft instability and fly-by-wire. Rather than prioritizing inherent stability, they adopted a relaxed or negative static stability, creating an aircraft that was dramatically more agile. And interestingly, the F-16 wasn't a purely unstable aircraft. At higher speeds, its stability actually increased, but at lower speeds, it becomes incredibly unstable, requiring hundreds of tiny control inputs per second just to maintain the desired trajectory, something that only a computer can achieve. And it's this change of stability that gives the F-16 its relaxed static stability term. As we discussed in our B2 story, such designs would have been impractical before the digital era, since no human pilot could continuously correct an unstable aircraft with the precision that's required. And although the F-16 would become the first production fighter built entirely around digital fly-by-wire, the origins of the technology actually lay in the space program. During the Apollo era, NASA faced the unprecedented challenge of guiding spacecraft through an unforgiving and highly dynamic environment. The Apollo guidance computer, famously primitive by modern standards, yet revolutionary at the time, demonstrated that machines could monitor complex systems, process data, and execute rapid corrections faster and more consistently than any human could. And these advances quickly captured the attention of aeronautical engineers. And in the late 1960s, NASA began exploring how digital flight control might reshape aircraft design through the F-8 digital fly-by-wire program. Now, incredibly, a surplus Apollo guidance computer was used in an electronic system that replaced conventional mechanical linkages in a modified F-8 Crusader, which became the first piloted aircraft to rely entirely on digital commands for primary flight control. The program showed not only that such systems were reliable, but they offered clear performance advantages. Computers could smooth pilot inputs, prevent departure from controlled flight, or at least make departures very unlikely, and enable handling qualities difficult to achieve with purely mechanical systems. By the early 1970s, the implications were becoming unavoidable. And it was during this technological shift that the F-16 emerged. Rather than treating fly-by-wire as an experimental feature, its designers made it the foundation of the aircraft. The jet was conceived from the very outset as a machine that depended entirely on digital flight control with no mechanical backup. The airplane and its computers were designed as a single, inseparable system, which quickly became the norm for all future fighter designs. And that design choice had knock-on effects for pretty much every other aircraft design out there, enabling features that simply just wouldn't have been possible before. Now, if you look at the F-16's side profile, you'll see that its nose isn't really pointing straight ahead. Instead, it's pointing several degrees down. And that's for a variety of reasons, including its relaxed static stability and vortex generation requirements. But ultimately, this design isn't optimized for flying straight and level. Instead, the F-16 is optimized for flight at high angles of attack. In other words, for turning in a dogfight with other fighters. Now, fly-by-wire enabled the F-16's designers to take such features to the extreme, along with forward extensions between the wing and the fuselage that increase lift and help reduce drag at high angles of attack. The design was also put on a diet. Every kilogram mattered and every subsystem was scrutinized. The guiding assumption was that excess mass, drag, and mechanical complication were enemies of performance. Engineers at General Dynamics didn't ask what the plane needed, they asked what it could do without. Hence why this is a single-engine aircraft. This wasn't the first or the last design to rely on a single power plant, and given the rest of the plane's brief, the layout made sense, but it went far beyond the engine itself. For example, the F-16 doesn't have a conventional auxiliary power unit or APU to supply its systems when the engine isn't running. Instead, it relies on an EPU or emergency power unit, a tiny engine powered by rocket fuel designed only for last resort contingency procedures. But even if designers gave away some redundancy in the engine front, they went the other way with the aircraft's flight control systems. The fly-by-wire system, upon which the aircraft's ability to fly depends, incorporates quadruple redundant digital brains, all running in parallel. And speaking of flight controls, let's take a look at the cockpit. Here, fly-by-wire enabled some real innovation. The side stick controller fixed to the right console enables rapid, precise inputs with minimal movement. The seat was fitted with a 30-degree recline to increase pilot tolerance to high G, directly reflecting and supporting the aircraft's manoeuvring capability. And the single-piece bubble canopy prioritised visibility because the designers believed that situation awareness itself was a form of survivability. In fact, the visibility from the cockpit is so good that when you're strapped into the seat, no part of the jet is visible, just an uninterrupted view of the surroundings, which is pretty incredible. But all of this was the aircraft's design in theory. But did it work in practice? Because once a machine enters operational service, reality begins to exert its own pressures. Missions and requirements shift, and operators inevitably ask the airplane to do more than its designers originally intended. And the F-16 was no different. Actually, the requests to change its mission and capabilities came even before it was put into production. You see, the original F-16 was conceived as a pure day fighter, small, agile, and optimized for high-energy maneuverability. But the design's underlying efficiency and its digital flight control system meant that adding new roles was easy with relatively few penalties in handling. And sure enough, production F-16A and B models were much bigger than the YF-16 prototypes that General Dynamics originally built. In service, new technologies allowed engineers to integrate terrain-following radars, inertial navigation systems, and precision strike capabilities without redesigning the aircraft further. Targeting pods came next, giving pilots the ability to identify and hit ground targets at night. And upgrades called blocks brought new capabilities to fighters rolling off the production line, as well as to existing fighters through midlife upgrade programs. So all of this means that airframes delivered decades ago can be modernized with active electronically scanned array radars, digital mission computers, and contemporary weapon systems, allowing operators to extend relevance without replacing the aircraft entirely. And importantly, the evolution didn't come at the cost of agility. The core airframe retained its responsiveness and its energy efficiency. This mission expansion allowed the aircraft to become a jack of all trades without becoming bloated or overcomplicated. Although it should be said here that its maximum takeoff weight has gone up a bit over the years. But that adaptability is a major reason why the F-16 became one of the most widely exported fighters in history, which gave it an almost unbeatable cost to capability balance. This allowed air forces with more constrained budgets to acquire a modern, high-performance fighter without accepting the financial burdens typically associated with larger twin-engine aircraft. And because thousands of F-16s have been produced, a vast global support ecosystem emerged around the aircraft. Manufacturers, suppliers, and maintenance facilities distributed across multiple continents ensure that parts, upgrades, and technical expertise remain widely available, helping operators maintain predictable lifecycle costs. General Dynamics and later Lockheed, who took over the design, increased the jet's appeal further by licensing production to other manufacturers worldwide. Early jets made for European operators were actually assembled in the Netherlands by Fokker, and later industries in other countries were given parts assembly contracts too. So the F-16 isn't an exclusively American fighter. Now, that global success, however, did not occur in isolation. The F-16 emerged from a competitive environment filled with aircraft that embodied very different design philosophies, and few comparisons are more instructive than the F/A-18 Hornet, which is about as old as the F-16. Interestingly, the Hornet's story is actually intertwined with the F-16s from the very beginning. The aircraft's lineage traces back to the YF-17, one of the competitors for the lightweight fighter program. Now, obviously the Air Force selected the smaller single-engine YF-16, but the YF-17 didn't disappear. Instead, it found a second life when the US Navy recognized that its characteristics, particularly its twin-engine configuration, aligned well with the demands of carrier operations. Through extensive redesign and navalization, which is a really long story in itself, the YF-17 evolved and transformed into the F-18. Where the F-16 embraced single-engine efficiency and extreme weight discipline, the F-18 was shaped by the unforgiving realities of naval aviation. Carrier operations demand robustness and redundancy, hence a two-engine design, as well as good low-speed handling. The resulting aircraft sacrificed some of the F-16's minimalism, but gained survivability and versatility within the carrier environment. Both designs would ultimately achieve remarkable success, albeit in very different ways. While the F-16 became a global export phenomenon, the F-18 carved out its own legacy as a naval workhorse and, somewhat unexpectedly, a cultural icon, as it became a movie star in the box office smash hit Top Gun Maverick. But of course, fame isn't everything, because while the F-18 may have gotten some screen time with Tom Cruise, the F-16 has sold more than 3 times as many units. And some might argue that the F-14 is actually the real star of Top Gun, but maybe we'll keep that for another video. Anyway, the F-16 and the F-18 have something else in common. They were both continually updated to meet new mission requirements. Both jets used digital fly-by-wire with a modular system philosophy, so they could both be built upon. So these jets did not need to be reinvented because they could just continuously evolve. The F-16 gained semi-permanent conformal external fuel tanks on the shoulders, while the F-18 was stretched and beefed up into the E and F Super Hornet models. Interestingly, the F-18's fly-by-wire works a bit differently from that of the F-16's, meaning that it's not constrained by angle of attack in the same way. So if we go back to that Thunderbird crash in Idaho, some people argue that the F-18's higher angle of attack ability and good low-speed performance would have potentially saved it, but that's hard to prove either way. But let us know in the comments below what you think about it. Either way, both of these jets managed to stay in production well into the era of stealth because modern air forces operate within complex economic, strategic and operational constraints. Stealth aircraft deliver extraordinary capabilities, but at great cost. However, not every mission requires stealth characteristics, and not every budget can sustain an all-stealth air force. Within this environment, aircraft like the F-16 continue to serve an important role, and incredibly, the plane could still be developed even further. Consider the F-16 XL, which we featured recently in another video. At first glance, it barely resembles the familiar F-16 at all. Its defining feature, the cranked arrow wing, dramatically altered the aircraft's proportions, creating a platform optimized for range, payload and high-speed efficiency rather than just pure agility. But the XL was not merely an experimental curiosity, it represented a serious attempt to adapt the F-16's underlying design philosophy to a different set of operational priorities. The new wing provided vastly increased internal fuel capacity and improved aerodynamic efficiency at supersonic speeds, allowing the aircraft to carry heavier loads over greater distances. Few aircraft so clearly embody a shift in engineering philosophy, and few have had such an impact. The F-16's fly-by-wire and side stick paved the way for airliners to use both, for at least some of the same reasons. And in that sense, the plane's true legacy extends well beyond the fighter world. Even today, it continues to pioneer new technologies like the Automatic Ground Collision Avoidance System, or AUTO-GCAS, that prevents controlled flight into terrain, which has already saved lives. So the F-16 didn't become an icon because it was the largest, the most powerful, or the most technologically extravagant fighter of its era. It succeeded because its designers were willing to challenge the deeply rooted assumptions about stability, maneuverability, complexity, and risk. By embracing digital flight control, disciplined weight management, and maximizing efficiency, they created a machine that operated closer to the boundaries of performance than many believed possible, and one that could evolve to stay relevant for decades. This aircraft stands as a reminder that revolutionary designs often look like calculated gambles, and few gambles in modern aviation have paid off so completely. But what do you think? What other fighter aircraft would you like us to feature in this series? Let us know in the comments below. I'm Ben Watts, you're watching Mentor Now. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you next time.